An agreement could be announced at any moment, but here's what we know at this hour about the hostages. The deal on the table would free about 50 Israeli women and children in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners. And more could be released if fighting in Gaza is paused for several days.
But some military officials warn any agreement could give Hamas crucial days to regroup and launch a counteroffensive on Israeli troops.
Complete coverage now. The former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, just moments away with his takeaway from the negotiations. But first, to our Trey Yingst. He is live on the ground in southern Israel. And Trey, what are you hearing from your sources on this possible deal?
Yeah, hey, John, good afternoon. We understand that Israel's war cabinet just wrapped up a meeting. Shortly, the security cabinet will have another meeting, and then the entire government expected to meet later to vote on this proposed ceasefire and hostage deal that could see dozens of Israeli civilians, mostly women and children, headed back to Israel in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. These conversations have been taking place at a very high level over the past several weeks. The Qataris helping to negotiate this along with the Americans, trying to get a ceasefire together for anywhere from 4 to 5 days with the possibility of an extension. Now, this will be staggered. The initial group is expected to be anywhere from 10 to 12 hostages released into Israeli custody after this 24-hour waiting period that is expected to allow the political and government process to play out in Israel before the deal moves forward. I do want you to listen to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who spoke earlier today about the possibility of a ceasefire and Israel's goals.
The first goal, eliminating Hamas. We will not stop until we are done. The second goal, bringing the hostages back. We are making progress. I don't think we need to discuss it further, not even at this moment. But I hope we will have good news soon.
At this moment, you can hear the buzz of an Israeli drone overhead. The Israelis are still surveilling the Gaza Strip, but as part of this agreement, there are reports that indicate Israel will reduce that surveillance as something that Hamas requested. We do understand as the agreement goes into place, more fuel and aid will still enter the Gaza Strip. At this moment, you can see some of the aftermath video from Gaza's second largest city of Han Yunis. There are still more than 2 million Palestinians inside Gaza in desperate need of medical assistance, food, and water. The Israelis continue to say their enemy in Gaza is not the civilian population, but rather Hamas. And even if this deal does move forward, we will see a pause in fighting. But the Israelis tell Fox News this afternoon they will continue to go after Hamas leadership when that deal is complete. John?
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had, is what happens after the ceasefire is over. The other question I had, Trey, is what is Hamas expected to do during this ceasefire? Because the fears from Israel have been that any ceasefire would only play into their hands, allowing them to regroup, rearm, and get ready for any onslaught that might come after a ceasefire.
Yeah, absolutely. There are huge questions right now about what happens the day after a ceasefire. Now, Israeli officials told us today the fighting will continue. They will continue to go after Hamas leadership, not just in the northern part of Gaza, but also the central and the southern part of Gaza. We're talking about two major population centers, Han Yunis and Rafah, these southern cities. But the Israelis have told all of the Palestinians to head south. So it raises questions about how they're going to operate in this area, with a firm understanding that most of the leadership from Hamas is no longer in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. They have moved south. They are in the tunnel network beneath Gaza. And even if they do release women and children, remember, they still have Israeli civilian men that are being held captive, hostage inside Gaza, and the soldiers that are taken, dozens of them, from what we understand, not even on the table as part of this agreement. John?
We're getting closer than we've been, John Kirby says. We believe we're getting closer. This obviously after the president, as we've been reporting, says he feels optimistic, but nothing is done until it's done. And John Kirby in his comments talking about he doesn't want to say anything in these delicate hours that could put this deal at greater risk. Trey, we're left wondering just how much time before we learn that this is indeed happening and those hostages actually get transferred.
So the announcement could come in a matter of hours following the government meeting in Israel and the approval of such a deal. There then likely will be a 24-hour waiting period where there could be people in the Israeli government who actually oppose this, surprisingly, saying that it's not a harsh enough response against Hamas. And then the court would overrule that and it would move forward. That's how it is expected to play out in Israel. But when we talk about how sensitive this deal is, I was speaking this morning with a regional source, someone who often provides a lot of information about these negotiations, and he requested every part of our conversation stay off the record. There's an understanding on the ground that any sort of information or movement or any development on the ground inside Gaza could put this deal at risk, even once the initial push that gets 10 to 12 hostages moves forward. It still could collapse, because in the past we have seen ceasefires collapse very quickly. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they are not rational actors, and despite coming to the table so that they can get this time to regroup and maybe get some of their leadership into safer areas of Gaza, in the past they have fired on Israeli forces during these lulls in fighting. They still have to remain on high alert inside Gaza. Remember, there are thousands of infantry troops still operating in the Strip. They could be ambushed, they could be attacked, and the Israelis are going to remain on high alert even if their surveillance capabilities are reduced as part of this agreement.
So, Trey, the IDF continues to operate at Al-Shifa Hospital. It's also at the Jabalia camp now, looking for Hamas tunnels, looking for Hamas infrastructure. Does the IDF still believe that the Hamas leadership is headquartered under Al-Shifa? Or, as you suggested, have the main players, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif, perhaps bugged out of there and headed for safer parts, maybe in the south of Gaza?
It's likely that Mohammed Deif and Yahya Sinwar left Gaza City possibly even weeks ago. They are likely in Han Yunis. You'll remember that Sinwar, his nickname is the Butcher of Han Yunis. It's where he was born and raised, and Mohammed Deif was actually his neighbor growing up. These are the two masterminds behind the October 7th massacre in southern Israel, and they are at the top of the Israeli target list. So Israel will continue to go after these individuals. There's an understanding on the ground that even once this war is over, whether it be weeks or months from now, that the Israelis, they have a long memory, and they will continue to hunt down Hamas leadership, even if they don't kill them in the initial war. We should also note, when we talk about the civilian population, we've been raising questions to the Israelis about how they will operate in the southern part of Gaza. They have projected this idea that they will operate to destroy Hamas leadership throughout the Strip and completely demilitarize Gaza. But the civilian death toll in Gaza continues to rise. They will face more international pressure, not just from their key ally, the United States, but from European partners, those who are asking questions about the operations inside Gaza. But the focus today very much remains on the highly anticipated possibility that a prisoner swap deal takes place. In terms of the details, Israeli media is reporting this will be a 3-to-1 deal. So for every single Israeli hostage that is released, there will be a Palestinian prisoner released along with 2 others. So 3 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 1 Israeli hostage. We're talking about women and children here. And the Israelis have put one caveat on the deal. They do not want anyone who was convicted of murder, currently sitting in an Israeli prison, to be released. They want to ensure they're not releasing the most dangerous people out into the streets where they are from, either in Gaza or the West Bank, so that they could commit another attack.
Trey, yesterday I had an interview with the Israel president, Herzog, and he said they're dealing with a psychopath in these negotiations. So all of these conditions, they have to just somehow assume in making this deal that they're going to come through and meet these conditions, and we have yet to know what condition these hostages will be in when they're passed over, if they're passed over.
You raise a great point, and during our reporting in the past inside the Gaza Strip, I have sat with Hamas leadership and Islamic Jihad leadership, and I've posed questions to them about Israel and the existence of the Jewish state. And their mindset is so different from the Israelis when they go into a negotiation like this. They don't care if they lose thousands of their own civilians. We saw that on display when they committed a massacre that they knew would draw such a heavy Israeli response. And so when we talk about the release of these hostages, the Israelis have to go into these negotiations understanding they will get what they can now. If that means dozens of women and children, they will take that as part of a deal that they are now talking about as we speak within the Security Cabinet. But they also understand the negotiations could collapse at any moment. The deal could collapse at any moment. It won't necessarily take 5 days, a day or two in. Hamas and Islamic Jihad could renew rocket fire on major population centers here. They have to keep all of that in mind, understanding they're not negotiating with a reasonable actor. And when they move forward, they will continue to operate in the Gaza Strip, understanding that some of the civilians and some of the soldiers that were dragged against their will into Gaza on October 7th just simply may never return home.
All right.
All right. Trey Yingst for us with the latest from southern Israel. Trey, stand by as we wait to see if this deal actually comes together. Meantime,